Imagine you are a soldier standing at the foot of a stone wall. In front of you is a deep moat. Above you, arrows are raining down. Beside you are wooden ladders, heavy shields, men screaming stones falling, and the city gate shaking with every blow. You only need to climb a few more meters to reach the top of the wall. But those few meters may be the last distance you ever travel. That is why ancient siege warfare was nothing like what we often see in movies. It was not just a matter of shouting, raising ladders, and rushing over the walls. In reality, attacking a fortified city was one of the most costly, brutal, and exhausting tasks in the history of war. Many ancient fortresses could hold out, not just for days, but for months, even years. Constantinople frustrated powerful Islamic empires for nearly 1,000 years. Xiangyang, under the Southern Song, resisted the Mongols for almost 6 years. Diaoyu Fortress was even linked to the death of the great Khan Möngke. It sounds like something from a martial arts legend, but it was real history. The strange part is this. Outside the walls, the attackers might have hundreds of thousands of troops. They had war horses, bow siege rams, stone throwers, siege towers, supplies, and commanders. Inside, there might be only a few thousand defenders. So why could the larger army not simply crush the smaller one? The answer lies in the fortress itself. Today, when people look at ancient ruins, they may think a fortress was just a set of large stone walls. But what survives today is usually only a shadow of the original defensive system. A true fortress was not a fence around a city. It was a war machine built to slow down, divide, exhaust, and kill the attackers step by step. The first layer was often the moat. And ancient moats were not small, decorative ditches. Many were dozens of meters wide and deep enough to stop horses, siege rams, and armored infantry from crossing easily. The moat of Ming-era Beijing was more than 30 meters wide. Some Japanese castles, such as Osaka Castle, had several layers of moats, forming something like a maze of water. Just crossing the moat could become a nightmare. Attackers had to fill it, bridge it, drag ladders forward, push siege machines, and do all of this, while defenders fired down from above. The closer they came to the wall, the more they were forced into narrow, crowded, chaotic killing zones. Only after the moat came the wall. These walls were extremely thick. Some were wide enough for soldiers to move along the top, store stones, mount engines, and in some cases, even allow horses to pass. The walls of Constantinople were famous for their layered defenses, frustrating both Europe and the Islamic world for centuries. Stone throwers could bombard them for days and sometimes only chip away small pieces. But the most dangerous part was not the wall. It was the gate. To modernize, a gate is simply an entrance. In ancient war, the gate was a trap. Everyone knew that if the gate fell, the city was in grave danger. That is why this area was always the most heavily defended. Around the gate were towers, archers, stone-throwing positions, murder holes, water drains, portcullises, and several gates placed one behind another. Some fortresses even had a barbican, a closed killing courtyard between two gates. If attackers broke through the outer gate and rushed inside, they were not necessarily in the city. They might discover that they had entered a giant stone box. In front of them was another gate. Behind them was the gate they had just broken. Above them came arrows, stones, boiling water, hot oil, and burning sand. In such a narrow space, numbers became a weakness because the more men crowded inside, the harder it was to move. That was the greatest advantage of the defenders. The terrain had already been designed to kill. A man standing on top of a wall always had the advantage over a man below it. The attacker had to wear armor, carry a shield, run through mud, cross a moat, raise a ladder, avoid arrows, and follow orders in the middle of screams and confusion. The defender stood behind cover, looked down clearly, chose his target and fired. Arrows shot from above hit harder and were easier to aim. Stones dropped from a height carried terrifying force. A stone did not need to be huge to break bone-smash shields and ruin a formation. Defenders could also use long spears to push ladders away, cut ropes, hook siege engines, or wait until the attackers gathered densely before pouring all their firepower into one spot. One especially feared weapon was red-hot sand. Boiling water and hot oil were already horrifying, but hot sand had its own danger. It could slip through gaps in armor into collar sleeves, and places a shield could not protect. For a soldier in heavy armor, getting it out in time was almost impossible. That is why in many medieval accounts, the foot of the wall was the deadliest place on the battlefield. In movies, soldiers climbing ladders often look heroic. In real life, it was almost a collective death sentence. The ladder had to be placed right against the wall. The men climbing had little room to dodge. The men below were trapped in a crowd. If defenders pushed the ladder aside, an entire line of men could fall. If they did not fall, they still had to climb while being shot, stoned, and stabbed from above. So why not just burn the gate? It sounds logical. Gates were made of wood and wood burns. But ancient builders were not naive. City gates were not thin house doors. They were massive blocks of hard timber, often treated against fire. Covered with iron, studded with nails, and heavily reinforced. To burn one, attackers first had to bring wood oil, and men right up to the gate. And that was the real problem. Standing in front of the city gate during a siege was like standing in a shooting range. Archers above had a close, clear angle. Stones could fall directly onto your head. Water could pour down through prepared channels. Mud or earth could be dumped to smother the flames. Even if the outer gate burned, there might still be a second gate, a third gate, a falling portcullis, or a narrow passage filled with defenders. So burning the gate sounds simple, but in reality it was rarely as clean or easy as movies make it seem. To break gates faster, attackers used battering rams. At their simplest, these were huge logs suspended by ropes, pulled or pushed by many men, and slammed repeatedly into the gate. The impact could be tremendous. Some rams had protective roofs covered with wet hides to resist fire and arrows. But getting the ram to the gate was already a major challenge. The ground might be dug with pits to trap its wheels. Defenders could drop huge stones onto the roof, use hooks to pull it apart, set it on fire, or suddenly open the gate and rush out to destroy it in close combat. If the ram got stuck at the foot of the wall, the men operating it had almost no way out. An even more dramatic weapon was the siege tower. This was a multi-level wooden structure as tall as the wall, or even taller. It carried soldiers and archers inside. Once it reached the wall, a bridge would drop from the tower, allowing troops to rush across onto the battlements. The idea was bold, but operating one was extremely difficult. A siege tower was heavy, needed flat ground, required many men to move it, and was highly vulnerable to fire. If defenders managed to burn its base, the entire tower could become a death trap. Every time a siege tower appeared, the battle became not just a test of strength, but a contest of timing and strategy. The attackers tried to bring the tower close. The defenders tried to destroy it before the bridge came down. Then there were stone throwers. If battering rams were like primitive tanks, stone throwers were the artillery of the ancient and medieval world. Early versions used torsion power. Later versions used counterweights and became far stronger. Some machines could throw stones weighing hundreds of kilograms across great distances. When dozens of them fired together, an entire city could shake. Watchtowers collapsed. Walls cracked. People inside panicked, but stone throwers were not used only to destroy structures. They were also used to destroy morale. Ancient armies sometimes launched corpses, rotting animals, or contaminated material into cities to spread disease and break the spirit of the defenders. During the siege of Caffa in the 14th century, Mongol forces reportedly threw plague-infected bodies into the city. Many historians believe this may have contributed to the spread of disease toward Europe. It sounds modern, but the shadow of biological warfare existed long before the modern age. Attackers did not only fight above ground, they also fought beneath it. One dangerous technique was mining under the walls. Attackers dug tunnels beneath the foundation and supported them with wooden beams. Once they reached the right point, they burned the supports. The tunnel collapsed, pulling the foundation down with it, and sometimes causing an entire section of wall to fall. Against walls too thick to break from the outside. This could be highly effective, but defenders had their own answer. They dug countermines. Both sides listened for digging sounds underground, tried to locate each other, and sometimes met in cramped, dark tunnels with barely enough air to breathe. It was a kind of combat where a soldier might see nothing but a weak lamp dust and a shadow rushing toward him. Yet the most frightening enemy in a siege was often not arrows, spears, stones, or fire. It was time. An army of tens of thousands consumed a massive amount of food every day. Horses ate even more than soldiers. The longer the siege lasted, the more logistics became a nightmare. Dirty water corpses, waste animal manure. Bad weather and crowded camps allowed disease to spread quickly. In some sieges, more attackers died from malaria, dysentery, or plague than from actual combat. Life inside the city was no better. As the siege dragged on, food ran out. People began eating whatever they could find. Dogs, cats, rats, grass, plants, even shoe leather. In some desperate sieges, historical records even mention cannibalism. So a siege was really a contest of endurance. The side that broke first lost. The walls might still be standing, but if the people inside starved, or if someone opened the gate in betrayal, the city could still fall. Many fortresses in history were not taken because their walls were destroyed, but because supplies ran out, routes were cut, insiders were bribed, or morale collapsed. That is why ancient commanders were often reluctant to attack fortresses directly. Military thinkers considered storming a city the lowest option, not because they were cowards, but because the cost was too high. Taking a fortress could consume months or years, burn through supplies, weaken the army, spread disease, and break morale. Even victory could leave the winning army exhausted. So instead of throwing men against stone, many commanders chose other methods. Cut off supply lines, maintain a blockade, bribe someone inside, lure the defenders out, attack the human heart, because it was often easier than attacking the wall. For thousands of years, walls were almost the kings of defense. They forced war to slow down. They turned a huge army into a crowd trapped before a moat. They allowed a few thousand defenders to hold back a far larger force. But then came the cannon. Before gunpowder, artillery attackers had to climb, dig, ram, burn, or wait for starvation. When large cannons appeared, everything changed. The most famous example came in 1453, when the Ottomans used massive cannons to breach the walls of Constantinople. A defensive system that had stood for nearly 1,000 years finally fell. After that, military architecture had to change. Old-style walls slowly became obsolete. Fortresses became lower, thicker, more angular, and better suited to the age of gunpowder. So the next time you watch a movie where soldiers rush up ladders and take a wall in a few minutes, remember what it could mean in real life. Mud bodies, broken ladders, burning siege engines, disease, and screams beneath the wall. Above them, stones, arrows, fire, boiling water, and defenders who knew exactly how much advantage they had. A siege was not just an attack on a wall. It was an attack on stone, hunger, disease, time, and finally, the will of human beings. That is why, in ancient history, even a successful siege could leave the victors nearly ruined. And that is why the smartest commanders understood one thing. The hardest wall to break was sometimes not the one made of stone, but the price paid to get past it.